mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 10, the Season 1 finale of Apple TV's Foundation, entitled The Leap. The leap is kind of pretty obvious here. Gail narrates it. It's essentially what we already kind of refer to as like a leap of faith. It starts off by her saying that going to sleep is a leap. You don't know if you're going to get up, right? And, she kind of talks about other kind of leaps of faith that are essentially just, taking a big risk for a big reward, essentially. And Gail's leap this week, I believe, was the leap that she made technically in an earlier episode. I don't think it was last week, maybe episode 8, where she decided to make the 138-year trip to her hometown. And what's interesting about her leap is that, she makes this leap. She did, against Harry's request, she decides to go to Synax. Takes 138 years to get there. She does it. And then she gets there and her home is gone. Just as she predicted, her home is gone. And I was writing my notes like, well, that was a waste. That was a waste of time. But she finds Salvor, and the leap pays off. I think it says something like, what did she say? Sometimes you leap, and then sometimes someone is brought to you, or something to that effect, right? Which essentially it was essentially saying something to the effect of, sometimes you take a risk, but then sometimes someone else does, and then that result ends up in front of you anyway. And Salvor took the risk of going to Synax to find Gail. Gail says that she'd been there for a century, so for 100 years, and yeah, and it paid off, and now mother and daughter are together. And I'm gonna pat myself on the back for predicting that Salvor was probably the child of Gail and Raish, but I can't pat myself on the back too much on that because I felt like it was kind of obvious. But anyway, as it pertains to this episode, I'm a little conflicted, right? I if you're somebody who follows this channel and has seen me talk about other shows and films, you know that I'm not a big fan of shows holding your hand. And this show has treated us like intelligent viewers this whole time. Like they haven't spoon-fed us information. You have to pay attention. This show makes you work, and I appreciate that. And I always kind of rip into a show whenever they just decide to have exposition where they just explain everything. And for a show that's treated us as smart viewers up to this point, to have an episode that's mainly exposition that just explains everything, generally I hate that. But this week, and this is why I'm conflicted, because generally I don't like that. But some of these exposition things were like really interesting, kind of mind blowing. I was kind of suckered into these explanations, right? The Harry's story. So the episode essentially opens with where we left off last week, with Harry coming out of the vault, and Harry spends like I don't know how much of the 60-minute runtime was Harry Seldon talking, but it was a strong portion because he has like a whole kind of a monologue early in the episode. Then he comes back and has another monologue that is equally as interesting, but it's just like a whole explanation. Like here's what happened. I'm like, man, y'all made us work for 9 episodes just to bring us to the last one and just explain everything. Have a character explain it. But I liked the stories though. Like I thought the story about the Anacreons and Thespins and how right now they're at each other's throats over a story that has over time has become so twisted and they don't even know the real details of it. And Harry tells them the details of this story about this Anacreon and Thespin who got married, and they're like, and then they butchered her in her sleep, and we've hated each other ever since. And Harry's like, no, fam, that's not what happened. And he tells what I thought to be an incredibly interesting story about how is actually Cleon II, the first clone, who essentially set the whole thing up. Harry said something like he saw that plants could unfold over generations, or whatever the fuck, something like that. Like he saw how this marriage could form an alliance that way down the road could be problematic. so he set it up, and I wrote down what Harry said exactly. He said something like, "Oh yeah," he said that the Cleon saw where the alliance would lead, so he had his Shadow Master seduce the Handmaiden, drug the newlyweds, murder their huntress, and implicate their king. I'm sitting here fucking like my head exploded. Like what? Like I just thought that was so fucking cool. Like what a cool story to have like this beef, and this show has focused on that a lot throughout this season. This idea that history really is told by the victor. So you're already getting a skewed viewpoint, and then how over time we become so far detached from the actual circumstance, the actual events that we're talking about. We come so far detached from it that what we think happened doesn't even really resemble what actually happened. Like this show has kind of played on that concept a lot throughout this season. It's been brought up multiple times. Look at it at just on a small scale. I think maybe like 2 episodes ago, Abbas, Salvor's father, had the thing. He was like, "Yeah, there's even this rumor going around that we were all on one planet called Earth." But that just goes to show, like, you can get so far away from the actual reality that when people talk about that time, the story is so different from what actually happened. And he makes it sound like it's like a wives' tale that, like, yeah, everybody lived on a place called Earth once. And the idea that the Anacreons and Thespins have been at each other's throats all this time basically they were played intentionally by Cleon. And here's the thing. I'm all over the place because I really did enjoy this episode, if I'm being honest. But I don't even know if I believe Harry's story. Like it might actually have been just the man killed the woman in his sleep, and none of that actually, like, the way they tell it is actually what happened. And Harry is lying, because Harry's whole purpose, we found out in his second monologue, was that he was never, the Foundation was never meant to be a curator of knowledge. It was meant to be a curator of people, which I liked that. The idea of, like, the plan the whole time was to get them out on Terminus on under false pretenses, basically make it look like everybody got wiped out, and then that way they could, fortify without Empire kind of like coming over, looking at them, checking on them. They could fortify freely to form an alliance. Start with the Invictus, build more ships like it, and build up an army that can attack Empire. And that was Harry's goal the whole time, which is cool. But I also thought curating knowledge was cool too. Fucking nerd or whatever. But if that is his goal, if his goal is to destroy the Empire and all of that shit, maybe he's manipulating them the way he's accusing Cleon of manipulating them. Maybe his story is bullshit and it's just meant to make them come together so that he can have an army to attack the Empire. So, like, I don't even know if I believe Harry's story, but it doesn't matter, because I just felt like all this was really cool. Like I said, I love this episode, but I was conflicted with the fact that generally I hate having everything explained to me, but this was a step past having everything explained to me, because 1, I thought the stories were really fucking cool, but 2, now my brain is working to the point where I'm like, I don't even know if I believe him, because he could be lying. Just like it's the same strategy that Cleon employed. like he say, like, yeah, Cleon had this whole thing where he saw this alliance could be a problem for him down the road, so he made up a whole story to convince y'all to hate each other. I'm like, well, maybe you making up this whole story to convince them to like each other so they can work, do what you want them to do. So, like, it's still very interesting the way that this played out. And I had a lot of fun listening to, like I said, my mind was blown listening to Harry talk. I'm like, how many times you going to surprise the fuck out of me in this episode? The only thing I wasn't surprised about was the Salvor thing, which I guessed earlier in the season. So, moving on from a lot of that craziness. Let's see. I liked how after he explained to them this whole story, he continues to give more exposition. Like, this kid just comes up to him and is like, "Hey, so what the fuck are you?" And he explains this whole thing about, like, I was laughing at the time because I'm like, man, this is Like they're just explaining everything. Like he just explained the whole thing. Like I took this pill, it did this to my DNA. Is essentially he is the vault, and the Anacreon's arrival kind of like started to rebuild his consciousness so he could come out there and give the greatest motivational speech of all time. Fucking what was my man? My man who coached Indiana, Bobby Knight, like fucking giving great fucking motivational speeches and shit. But I thought that it was a cool revelation though. So I'm like, man, like I said, I'm tripping on the exposition stuff and how he just explains everything. Like he explains the null field, about his consciousness being like all that, like everything was explained. But I just thought it was fucking cool. I don't know what to say, man. But aside from the exposition stuff, there's also, and this is what actually makes me able to sit here and definitively say that I love this episode. There's some really cool fucking scenes in this episode. The scene with Dawn and Day after he's like essentially, well, not released, but he's brought to his room, but he's still in cuffs. And I guess he's meant to kind of like have this conversation with Day, and they're gonna figure out what's gonna happen. And Day sounds fairly merciful in this conversation, and Dawn makes a lot of good points about like you don't ever want to leave here. You don't feel like a cog in a machine almost, and like you don't like basically kind of like challenging like the idea of having free will to kind of like do what he wants. And he says like we're just echoes of the first Cleon. And Day says a line that's something like, "Is a corrupted echo more original than a perfect one, or does it fade into the darkness?" or something like that, which I thought was a interesting line in retrospect, given that we later find out that Day himself might be altered. Like he might not be a perfect clone himself. So I thought that was an interesting kind of twist as well. And that could be an explanation. The fact that he's not if he's not a perfect clone, that could be why he shows some mercy toward Dawn, as opposed to being the Day that we've seen throughout the entirety of the show so far. And then Day also has a moment where I'm thinking, that he's being merciful, right? He allows Day. He mentioned something about this is where we should bend or something like that. Show some leniency. And Dusk gets all pissed off. They start fighting, and Dawn goes over and is basically being hugged by Demerzel because he's fucking terrified for some reason. I mean, I guess it makes sense that he'd be terrified, but he's terrified. And I'm thinking in this moment, I'm like, man, Day is showing a whole lot of just a whole lot of, I hate to call it this, growth, maybe. Like ever since he came back from the Maiden, he's showing a lot of flexibility and a lot less harshness toward Brother Dawn. And that kind of made me feel like maybe that's why he's doing that, because he isn't a perfect clone of Cleon. And he felt like all of these decisions were kind of like almost like built into his DNA. And now he's showing this flexibility, and it makes me wonder if that flexibility comes from the fact that he's not a perfect clone. But then also, I would have thought that Day was turning a new leaf, but it's really only as it pertains to Dawn, because of the fucking, I can't even explain how fucking sick the scene was where Day is talking to Azura. Holy fuck. Like, I was like the way that conversation already kind of felt kind of like foreboding as it began, but they're walking through the garden. Day seems like mad cool in the moment, but then he starts talking about he found all of her family. He found everybody that she is even tangentially kind of like related to. Like, oh, we found your fucking barber. like he found like everybody, and then we found all of their loved ones. I'm like, holy shit. And it was like he was given for some reason giving the exact numbers made it even scarier. Like he's like, well, that was 700 something people. Then we found all of that was 800 something people. And he says something like 1,133 lives that are in some way connected to you. And then he puts his hand up and says something like, yeah, like we have eyes on them right now with guns at their lasers at their whatever cerebral cortex, and at my signal they can all be gone. He just like flips his fingers and like nothing happens, but you just think, holy shit, he just killed all these people. that just because like not even because they knew Azura, because like they were related to somebody who passed Azura on the street. Like it was crazy. It was fucking crazy. And then he goes in on her like you're gonna be he didn't say sedated, but like you're gonna be like they're gonna take away her senses or something like that, and you're gonna be fed intravenously, and basically like you're just gonna be a fucking vegetable for the rest of your life, and you're just gonna think about what you did. Like, oh my god, that scene was so fucking good. That was the best scene of the series. That was one of the coldest like monologuing kind of threats that I've ever seen in anything. Like that was fucking sick. Man, like nothing. The whole rest of the episode could have been shit, and I would have gotten in front of you guys and said I love this episode just on the strength of that scene. That scene was so fucking cold, man. What was the scene where so Demerzel kills Dawn and says that her loyalty is to Empire above all, and then she goes in and she's tortured over this because we know that Demerzel like is like it's built into her. I guess we'll call it programming to do what is best for Empire, but we know that she also has like her own kind of feelings and whatnot. Like so she could kind of know like I have to do this. I'm going to do this. I have no control over doing this, but I'm gonna feel shitty about it. And she goes and that face ripping scene was incredible. Like to look at. Wow, like that was amazing to look at. I love that scene because like when it first started, I'm like, but then it like keeps going. I'm like, this is so fucking cool looking. Whoever, I don't know how they did that, if that was like CG or if it was like some so a combination of that with like some fancy makeup or something. Like prosthetics, I mean. But oh man, that looks so fucking cool, man. Oh, let's see what else. I talked about the monologue. Demerzel killing Day, talked about that. Salvor being the kid of Gale and Raish, talked about that. Okay, so yeah, I think I've talked about everything. So, again, I love this episode. I'm conflicted because of the exposition, but I thought the exposition was great. I thought Harry's stories and explanations were incredibly interesting. I love the fact that what this show is keeps kind of like getting turned on its head, like because I was cool with it just being, like I said, being a curation of knowledge, and it's just the show is kind of like a matter of preserving their ability to do this. But now that it's kind of turned into like the defense is now on offense, I think that's cool too. So all kinds of cool shit there. Patting myself on the back about the Salvor being Gale and Raish's kid thing, and that Brother Day scene with Azura was absolutely fucking incredible. So I really enjoyed this season. Like I said to you guys at the beginning, it got off kind of to a slow start, laying the groundwork, building the foundation for what this show was going to be and what this world was going to look like. And I'd say like maybe like these past 6 episodes or so have really paid off. I'm really intrigued and invested. I haven't really seen any really positive takes on the show, but I really enjoyed it. Like this is probably going to end up in my top 10. I found it to be incredibly interesting. And I think back on the great moments with like the episode with Day walking the spiral, like that kind of shit. Like there was so many cool things. When Day screamed that one guy to death, like that was cool. I loved this episode with everything with Harry and all of the cool scenes in here. I love last week's episode. Like I thought this show primarily was a success. So I hope that we get more seasons of it because I thought it was really fun. So until then, peace.